What's up, YouTube? ProTech here, back with another StarCraft 2 video for you guys today. In today's video, we are going to do a analysis of a pretty high level game that I played on yesterday's stream. Reason I'm doing this is because when I'm doing my live streams, I don't really have the talent or the skill to do commentary, but at the same time play, my A game. So I thought it would be fun, maybe a little bit insightful for some people to kind of get into the mind of some of these games that I'm playing. Without further ado, let's do it. So the perspective of playing solo queue is going to be vastly different than it is, if you're playing like pre-made or something like that. And oftentimes what you do is very dictated on whether you have a decent ally or not, right? So in this game, I played a couple of games previously with this Zerg player that's on my team, and he wasn't particularly good, but good enough for me to like be able to function in the game, right? And so that's kind of the thought process that goes through your mind at the beginning of these games. Okay, so do I have a teammate who's actually going to play the game, and am I going to be able to function normally throughout the course of the game? It's pretty rare, but this particular game is one of those games where you're able to function normally. Now, also keep in mind that there is a very big difference between playing in 30 ping and 400 ping. The vast majority of games that I play these days are 400 ping, and so, I'm not really able to perform, to the max level, right? So that also plays a very big role into the decision making when you're watching me play these games. So just to preface this by saying that this game is a 400 ping game, so some of the decisions might be a little weird, but that's just one thing to keep in mind. Also, another important thing, like the loading screen, when you get to a high level, it's very important to pay attention to the loading screen, because a lot of players are known for doing certain things, and more importantly, you want to be able to gauge the skill level of your opponents, and a lot of the decisions that you make are based on that as well. So anyway, coupled with the fact that these two opponents that I'm playing against, I've played against very frequently in the past. I've lost many games against this Terran player. I know the Terran player is pretty decent, and I know that the Zerg player opponent he's kind of a mixed bag. Sometimes you'll see some kind of cheesy play. Sometimes you'll see macro play, right? So that's kind of just what's going through my mind here at the beginning of this game. And so, there's, unless you scout, which I don't do because I play random, that's just kind of like a gamble, like opening in this sort of manner. This is just a simple gate expand, and then we go from there. Now, based on previous games that I played with this Zerg player, one of the things that was very apparent is that he does play the race properly. In other words, the way I see it is that Zerg is more of a support role, and it's really just there to empower the Terran, or it's there to empower the Protoss, or empower the Zerg if he's playing with a Zerg player, right? So that's very much so his approach based on the previous games that I've played with him. So one of the things that you're seeing me do here, you'll see that my Nexus is oversaturated, and you can see that I'm going to continue oversaturating it. Well, one of the problems, uh, very specifically in 2v2 with the way that the maps are designed, you can kind of see like the distance between the main and the natural. You know, you got to go all the way down here. When you're playing against a Terran player, you know, it's very common to see them open with a Reaper. And you can see that on this map, there is just a enormous amount of space and places that the Reaper can jump up, right? And so one of the things that I've learned over the years is that if you are playing against Terran player, you want to wait to send your workers from this location down to this location. You want to wait for this first unit to come out, because if you don't do that, what ends up happening is you almost will always lose between 1 and 2 probes. So it isn't ideal, right? Under normal circumstances, you would want to rally your workers and not oversaturate like this. It just isn't as efficient. But it's important that you do that against Terran, especially on maps that have a lot of Reaper jump up spots and stuff like that. Because you will almost always lose between 1 and 2 probes if you do that. So, you know, here we're just playing a standard open. Nothing too wild. Now, there are a couple of different variants that I do when I play this blink open. And a lot of times, if I'm playing with a teammate who is low rank, you don't really have a choice but to cut workers at like 34 or 35 and get your extra gateways and your robotics up. Because if you don't do that, if you do not cut workers at 34 or 35 and do that and your teammate is useless, you're going to lose all your probes. So if I know that my teammate is decent, you don't need to gimp on your economy. And when I say decent, he's good enough to buy enough time for you to not have to do that, right? And if you are able to do this, it makes a world of difference going into the mid to late game. Unfortunately, when you're playing solo queue, in most cases, you cannot do that. You have to cut at 34, 35, somewhere in there, get out your 2 gateways and your robotics, because if you don't do that, you're going to lose to a push. You're going to basically lose all your economy to some kind of push. But in this game, you can see that I'm, you know, just continuing, and then just continue, and then build the production, right? So this is just a fairly standard 3-gate robo open. And you'll see here I've taken the double gas at the natural. Now the reason I'm doing this is because I want to get out a Colossus. When you play against TZ, it's very important that you have area of effect damage. Not always necessary, but one of the reasons I started doing this is because when you're playing in 400 ping, landing storms is a very difficult thing to do. Landing Nova shots with disruptors, that's a very difficult thing to do. And so when you're playing in 400 ping, in my opinion, the best approach is to get out some guaranteed AoE, right? Area of effect. And the reason area of effect is so good in, you know, from the Protoss perspective, when you're playing against TZ, there's a lot of Lings, there's a lot of Marines. Colossus are pretty good against that. So that's what I'm opting for here. Now, the reason that you open with like a blink open like this is because one of the most common things, especially on a map like this, is like tear and drop play. I mean, you can see how easy it is to abuse drops on this map. Like this map, above all of the other maps that are in the pool, is so heavily Terran favored, and so when you play these matches, you have to have that understanding and make the right choices. So blink is absolutely the right choice here. Now, there is an obvious weakness with this build, right? The obvious weakness with this build is that if, you see something like this, but, let's just say that he decided to do, one of his more aggressive variants, which he did not do in this game. He took a third. That lane count would have been doubled. And at the time of this push, our teammate is, he's morphing in Banes, but he's played a little bit more greedy, and there's no lings, and just kind of like the way that Protoss works, it's very difficult to hold stuff like this, because if you've ever spent any time playing 1v1, the race operates off of like a shield battery and like a really low unit count, right? But in 2v2 you can't really do that because of the way that the maps are designed. I mean, you can even see starting at the natural, this isn't a one-player ramp that you can just wall, right? And so it's pretty important that if you are a Terran player or you are a Zerg player, that you're really buying enough time for Protoss to get his production up, because this is just how the race functions right now. So you can see if he had chose to do like more of an aggressive build, we would have just straight up died here. I mean, we may not have died per se, but you can see with the variant that I did, and this is kind of going back to what I was saying before about cutting at 34 probe or 35 probe to get your production out. This is very specifically why you kind of need to do that, in today's environment, because you'll end up losing to stuff like this if you just crank out the probes nonstop, right? Now, again, that depends on teammate. So we got a little lucky here. It's a little fortunate that he opened with more of a greedy variant instead of like a super all-in variant, because I mean our teammate is spreading creep, which you never want to do against Zerg, because it empowers these types of plays if you are not ready for it, which in turn screws your teammate over, screws you over. It's just a better approach not to spread creep at all against Zerg. So this push that the Zerg player did just ended up being, a little bit of pressure, but more greed, right? Now, the other fortunate thing is that the Terran player here has gone for like a Marine composition, like didn't include Hellions or anything like that. If he had Hellions in that composition, the Zerg player takes a lot more damage, right? But you can see Lings and Marines and getting out area of effect, very important. And that Immortal that I built, that was an accident. I didn't mean to do that. I think what happened here was my Immortal hotkey is the I hotkey, and my Observer hotkey is the O hotkey. And sometimes if I go to tap Observer, I'll fat finger I and O at the same time. So this isn't part of the build. That was definitely a mistake. And believe it or not, that can be a huge mistake, because if they do make a big push, you really want to have that Colossus. But anyway, so you see the siege tank, right? So I see the siege tank, and then the choice here is instead of building more production, I decide to go for the third base, because, you know, once the siege tanks come out, you can't really do much. So, macro. And then, you know, at this stage of the game, it's, you know, it's really just all about being in the right place at the right time, right? You know, there could be a double drop coming up this way and then, you know, wipes out his base and my army's down here, but you don't really have a choice because the mobility, right? TZ has crazy mobility. Being all over the place is a very difficult thing for Protoss to do at this particular phase of the game. Another reason for the blink open, right? So at this point, you kind of have to make a choice, like, are you going to go for the forges or are you going to go for the extra production? Well, based on what I've seen in this game, I'm not 100% sure if going for the double forge was the right choice, but that's the decision that I made. You know, in hindsight, now that I look at this replay, given the fact that Terran does not seem to have a third here, maybe going for the extra production might have been the right choice. But that's not what I opted for. So, as you can see this composition, right? Colossus is insanely good against this composition. You can also go Storm, but again, Storm, not guaranteed AoE. And when you're playing a 400 ping, not a great idea. But, I mean, there does come a point where you do have to make that transition because they get too much hard counter on the Colossus. But I would say throughout the course of the games that I play, this area, this timestamp that we're currently in, is by far the most difficult, because being in the right place at the right time as your third base is going up it's just incredibly hard to do, right? It's like you've got a single robo, you need AoE, but at the same time you need observers to, you know, be able to spot the drops, be able to spot the move out, so that you are making sure that your army is in the right place at the right time. And one of the ways that you can fix that in 2v2 is, you know, not doing what he's doing with his OVs. You know, you could put your OV like right here. You could put your OV like over here, or like, you know, maybe on that pervert pillar. You know, putting, like, if you've got a bunch of lings like this, you can it's a lot more cost efficient to put lings on the tower than it is Protoss units, right? Lings are 50, 25 mineral. These are 125 mineral and 50 gas. It's kind of pointless, right? So once the third gets up, once I start the upgrades, that's when I start adding the additional production. And you'll see here I'm making a Templar Archives. Now, the idea here is that the opponents have known that this is Colossus for like a long time, right? So logic would suggest that because they know that this is Colossus, there's a very good chance that they're going to start countering Colossus. And so if they do start countering Colossus, you need to have a backup plan with your AoE. That could be Disruptor if you're playing in low ping. The next go-to choice for me in high ping is Storm, because forget about a Disruptor. You're not going to be able to micro it. And if we take a look at the production tab here, we can see a Spire. And then if we take a look at the units tab here, we can see... Well, I'm not seeing any Vikings yet. But that Spire is going to be for Corruptor. Because if, Protoss decides he's going to go 2 Robo, Spire is very good against that. So once the third base gets up, I feel pretty confident to start making some, a little more like aggressive plays, right? My 1-1's finishing. I got Zealot Charge on the way. I got my transition underway. And so at this point, it's like, okay, probably time to do something, right? So I thought, pressuring this location made sense based on the composition that I've seen. I've seen Marines, I've seen Zerglings. If they decide to attack, I should be okay. I should be able to retreat and maybe shave off some of their army, right? But you'll see I only poked in there for a couple seconds, right? I didn't do too much, but you can see how much mining time he's losing here. And the reason that I ran away like that was because if we take a look at where my army or my teammate's army is, it's all the way over here. So if I linger in this location for too long, I'm going to get sandwiched by 2 players. And as we could see, that wasn't really, I was never in really any danger of that happening, but I don't cheat and I don't know that. So I assumed that that's what was going to happen there, right? Now, I made that recall, and the reason I did this was because when I made this pressure, I saw no army or no attempt to do anything about this. And so because we had no vision on the map here, I decided that I was going to recall because I was worried that this drop was trying to set up, it's called multi-prong, where the Terran player drops and then they attack the front, right? And because I have no vision, I have to make this decision. Okay, so because this is happening, there's a very good chance that they are crossing the map. So I recall to make sure that I'm in position if that is in fact true. So you can kind of see how having map vision is like stupidly important, right? So you'll notice I have basically cut all Colossus production, and now I'm working on Legs and Storm. And that is in preparation for the potential hard counter to Colossus, right? So if we take a look at the production tab, we can see that there are 5 corruptors in production. So, this is around the time where making the transition into Storm makes sense, right? Now, it's different if they didn't see the Colossus and you hid them well, that's different. But because they had knowledge of it, these are the types of decisions that you make throughout the course of the game. And that blink forward was absolutely terrible. It was absolutely terrible. I didn't realize that this army was over here. So that was a horrible play on my part. But you can see, like, there's a concept that I always talk about where, you know, I try to tell Zerg players, bro, you do not want to spread creep in this matchup. You don't want to spread creep at all. Because if you take a bad engagement like that, all you're doing is you're giving the Zerg player more power to just end the game. And so if you find yourself in that situation, as you can see here, our teammate right now currently has 2 Hydras on the field. Excuse me, 5 Hydras on the field. He's got a bunch in production, but you can just kind of see this is the reason why I tell people do not spread creep, because if you find yourself in this position, it makes it significantly more difficult to eke out a win. Now, we got a little lucky here because they retreated, right? And so what that told me was that there's a good chance that they somehow know about this, you know, whether it's from the watchtower or something scouted it. So because they retreated, I'm like, okay, I need to go down here and defend this. And it's good because you can see this little space right here bottlenecks everything, and Colossus are really good in that scenario. Not that it matters because the Corruptors are out. But the Colossus ended up getting a ton of kills on the Marines, so very significant. But now you can see he's overmade Corruptor, and I've already stopped that production. My transition's underway, right? So this is useless supply. Not necessarily useless. It can kill overlords and buildings and stuff like that, but in terms of just fighting power, it's gone, right? As you can see, stuff like this, right? And this is very difficult to deal with on this map in particular, because it just takes forever to get, you know, traverse between all the bases. And, you know, when you look at the bases, you might not think that's true, but it really is on this map. So now I've got a lot of different things going through my mind, but the main thing here is I just need to get my army value up. The Zerg player has overcommitted to dealing with the Colossus play, so his ground army is going to be pretty weak. So as long as I'm able to land good storms, keep my upgrades going, I'm in a pretty good spot. Even though it may not look like it, I'm actually in a pretty good spot. A little pressure right there. You know, one of the things that a lot of players suffer from is when dealing with these types of things, they send their whole army to it. I do it too sometimes. But this is one of the plays that you can make to just buy yourself a little bit more time, right? So you'll see I fully committed here, right, into the fog. And that may have looked blind, but it wasn't actually blind because I did that based on the fact that I saw a big chunk of his army here. So I just assumed that he fell victim to the F21A stuff, and just A moved up the ramp to gain the tower. So when you're playing a 2v2, there's something that you guys really do not want to do, okay? And it's what this guy is doing. You see how he's expanding at all of the locations? It doesn't really make sense, right? Like, you're not really you have to be able to identify that you're not really participating in the game too much. And when you do this stuff, it just, I mean, it takes away from the player who is actually doing the heavy lifting. So the point I'm trying to make here is that this type of a play right here, you do not want to make if, you know, your teammate is the one who's doing all the heavy lifting. He needs the resources. So here we're at 200 supply, and when you get there, you know, you've got to start making plays happen in some way, shape, or form. So at this point, I remember when I was playing the game, I said, this teammate is uncarryable, just go and then, you know, queue up for the next game, right? But it ends up being a lot more significant than I thought it was going to be. And to be honest, I really don't even know why that is, because if I look at the supplies here, I mean, this is, I'm up against 400, basically 400 army supply. We got 85 workers on the Terran, 71 workers on the Zerg. So, okay, so the vast majority of his, well, not the vast majority, but he's got quite a bit of supply here in drops. So here I just want to send this big army down here to cut off any reinforcements, and then use the storms if there's anything like in this general area, right? So that's how I've split up the army here. And those, man, look at those roaches. Look, man, they, like, one more storm, they all would have died. Doing this is a pretty good play right here, because then it gives him all of his HP back. Now, one of the mistakes that I'm making here is that I'm still sitting on 8 gateways. Or, well, actually, maybe I have more than that. At this type of a bank, you want to have more gateways. There's no reason for me to have this type of gateway count. So that's definitely a mistake. As you can see, my resources are really high. If this army gets wiped out, I need to be able to replenish it, right? But as you can see, my army's 3-3. Zerg is 1 Carapace, no attacks there. 1 Carapace, no attacks there. So the reason that this all went so well for me was because the Zerg player is not upgrading his army, right? And also the Terran player, same thing. 1 armor and 2 weapons. So, you know, even though they're playing a super good macro game, as you can see, like in terms of economy, I mean, he's sitting on 1 armor, 2 weapons, but he's not upgrading, right? Zerg player, I don't even see evolution chambers. So watching this replay, actually, we shouldn't have won. Where they screwed up was not upgrading their army, because once you get to, like, once your opponent has 3-3, you better have 3-3. If you don't have 3-3, you're going to lose every fight. But, you know, anyway, it's pretty straightforward from here, right? It's like they don't have upgrades. So they cannot contest with my army. Now, Zerg player did go for Broodlord, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he's got Broods. So that can kind of sort of be a thing, but not really. And then, like, one of the clutch things that my teammate did here was get out 3 Carapace Ultras, which tanks quite a bit for my army. But again, it only does that because they don't have upgrades. So anyway, it's pretty much straightforward from here. As soon as that 3/3 kicks in, and you know you check your opponent's upgrades, and they're significantly weaker, it's not really rocket science. You just crank out the units and a move. Broodlords can kind of be scary here, but just with the current state of the game and you know how well I played, doesn't really matter. So from here, it's just a matter of getting stalkers out, killing the Broodlord, killing the bases, going through the motions, etc. But anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. You know, I'm thinking about putting out more content like this. I know a lot of you guys watch my live streams, and I don't really analyze or break down or anything like that. So some people might be interested in this perspective of the games that I play. And other than that, that's all I've got for you guys. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace out.